All right, so here we are at the end of the RDNA 3 launch week, and when I look around in the online discussion rooms, the only thing people really still want to talk about seems to be what is wrong with RDNA 3. And it's funny, one of my more successful videos in the past month was that don't wait for the 4070 video. And I did it because when I looked around, everyone was talking about the 4070 and if they should wait for it. And so, well, once again, I've taken the temperature of the online community, and I think this is probably what you guys actually want to have answered. What went wrong with RDNA 3? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. But if I'm going to talk about that, the first thing I actually need to address is an argument I've been seeing from a certain camp of people online that are basically saying, in reality, the RDNA 3 launch is really no better than what a reasonable person should have expected. It was just so overhyped like usual. And I've even seen these people often comparing RDNA 3 to what happened with AMD Vega back in 2017. Now, to be fair, I definitely see the comparison to Vega. I do. But I have to start this video by pointing out these are not even within the same magnitude of circumstances. You see, back in 2017, Vega was hyped up and expected to be some sort of 1080 Ti competitor. And, well, half of that expectation, if we're being honest, came from the fact that AMD basically said it would be, but then it didn't end up being that. So again, AMD have themselves to blame for overhyping it, just like now. But you know what? I didn't have a YouTube channel back then, but I remember a lot of the hype around the Vega rumors centering on the fact that it would have 12 teraflops or more of compute performance, which was above what the 1080 Ti had on paper, although people forget that the 1080 Ti actually boosted higher than what its teraflops rating was officially. And also the hype came around the fact that Vega would have 8 gigabytes of next-gen HBM2 memory. People saw the teraflops. They saw 8 gigabytes of HBM, double the buffer of the Fury X, and I think they forget that when all was said and done, Vega's specs actually weren't that impressive compared to a 1080 Ti. You see, the final clock speeds on HBM2 were a bit below what was expected, and it actually had less bandwidth than its predecessor, the Fury X. Additionally, the 1080 Ti had far more ROPs than Vega 64, and so, yeah, the thing ended up performing about a full tier behind the 1080 Ti, even when you use liquid cooling. When I look at the actual specs, I'm honestly not that surprised. You see, yes, AMD had a die size comparable to what the 1080 Ti was using, but it was on an inferior GlobalFoundries node that did not clock as well with lower voltage compared to what Pascal was using from TSMC. And I'm sorry, Pascal was clearly engineered to be a gaming first and second architecture, and Vega was kind of a compute first architecture that was meant to be very efficient if you put it in a smaller die and, well, I don't know, an APU, right? And so, all things considered, Vega, it probably fell short of what AMD wanted to accomplish with that architecture in terms of gaming performance, but considering how well it performed at certain things compared to the 1080 Ti, but one of them not being gaming, I honestly don't think the results were that crazy. That's just not the case. That is not the case with Navi 31. Compared to the RX 6950 XT, the 7900 XTX has 67% more bandwidth. Vega 64 actually had less bandwidth than the Fury X. Additionally, the 7900 XTX has 50% more ROPs than the 6950 XT. Again, not the case. Vega and the Fury X, same amount of ROPs. And teraflops, my lord, the 7900 XTX has 2.6 times the teraflops of the 6950 XT. And look, no, teraflops do not equal performance. We've seen this time and time again, and nothing scales linearly. But we're not talking about something being a little more. Nobody designs an architecture with almost 70% more bandwidth and closer to triple the teraflops than double to get like a 30 to 40% performance increase. That is just a massive waste of silicon sand. And speaking of wasted sand, to those that argue Navi 31's die size is what should suggest to you that it wouldn't compete with the 4090, it's not even using the full configuration. AMD gave it only 96 megabytes of Infinity Cache, less than the 6950 XT, not the full 192 megabytes it could have accepted. AMD wouldn't have designed something that could go up to that much infinity cache unless they thought the top model might need it. And in fact, if you were to give Navi 31 the full amount of infinity cache, if the compute units were performing like they're supposed to, you would actually get to a die size that's as big or bigger than the 4090. So absolutely not. It is ridiculous to suggest the card they just launched was ever intended to sometimes perform like this, only around 5 to 10% better than the 6950 XT in some situations. And then even in games where it looks okay compared to the 4090, it often loses ground in 1440p, which is truly bizarre given the advantage AMD has had in 1440p relative to NVIDIA in recent generations. It's almost like the memory controller is doing all of the performance uplifts right now, and that's why AMD performs okay sometimes in 4K, but loses grounds in lower resolutions despite having a CPU utilization advantage over NVIDIA. So yeah, what went wrong? I had to start this video talking about how obvious it was that something clearly has gone wrong, that nobody should have expected this level of performance, especially with what AMD told us publicly. But we're going to get into it. What is happening? Can they fix it? Should you hold out hope that this card, this generation, the series RDNA 3, will age like fine wine over time, or is it just a complete bust? But first, an ad from a sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Hero Wars. Hero Wars is an online role-playing action game with a variety of PvP and PvE modes. You can complete fun puzzles, fight against powerful bosses, and experience a unique story conveyed through a charming art style. And in this story, you'll collect loot, upgrade your champions, and complete 13 campaign chapters and 190 missions in this classic fantasy game that has over 50 unique heroes with unique abilities that you can combine and assemble into battle in arenas and traversing the Endless Tower. And you can have even more fun online as well, creating guilds, fighting with other players, and enjoying special holiday events like Winterfest that is currently going on through December. They are always adding fun special events. Join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero, 600 emeralds, and 30,000 gold. Clicking on this link helps you turbocharge the beginning of your adventure, and honestly, just clicking on this link helps the channel a lot. And you can play this on mobile or web browser as well, like I did when I tried it out. So click on the link, help the channel, try out Hero Wars, and get looting today. All right then. So the first thing I want to reiterate before I get into my theory of what I believe is going on with RDNA 3 is that AMD, at least as of, a little over a year ago, really did intend RDNA 3 to be able to go toe-to-toe with NVIDIA's flagship, well, using less energy. Like I leaked again earlier this week, something that I've been saying for over a year, last year in 2021, AMD really did think they'd have something special with RDNA 3. They really did think it would be Radeon's Zen 2 moment, and these were the same sources that got me the highly accurate RDNA 2 leak information, the Bergamo leak, and many other accurate AMD leaks as well. I'm telling you guys, they really thought they were going to win a year ago. They just haven't achieved what their goals were. And so then let's get into my theory. I believe over the past year and a half, they had an architecture that looked great on paper, that performed well in simulations, and over time, they always had some benchmarks like this one, or this one, or this one, that they could point to and say, we're going to hit our goals, we're going to beat NVIDIA, RDNA 3 is going to be the king. And then as they got closer to the launch, a lot of the performance continued to be all over the place. They always had things they could point to that looked good, but they couldn't get the average to be near there. And so, well, they announced ahead of time that not only were they launching this year, but that they had to reveal everything on November 3rd. And right before November 3rd, they heavily cherry-picked their benchmarks for the scenarios that performed like they were expecting the average to be. And then they just hoped, well, hopefully over the next 6 weeks, we can get the entire average to be close to what we're showing them today. This is kind of like a lying by omission scenario where AMD genuinely thought they could get close to what they said, a 1.5 to 1.8x performance increase over the 6950 XT, but they technically only had a handful of scenarios that were performing how they expected the architecture to perform. And you can almost chart the decline in confidence from AMD over the year, right? That cherry-picked benchmark thing I showed you, they didn't seem that confident, but hopeful that they would pull something off. That's a far cry from the beginning of the year where AMD was just like firmly stating we're bringing 54% performance increases. They went from that to saying a bunch of things are up to this level of performance, but we're not sure what the average is yet, and just misleading us wildly from what it would end up being, to right after that cherry-picked benchmark presentation, AMD started almost walking things back. It was almost like an inverse of what happened when AMD said that Zen 4 would bring an over 15% performance increase and over 5 gigahertz clocks. They way downplayed how good Zen 4 was, realized afterwards, and then had to go out and say, no, it's going to be great. If you think about it, they kind of told us it was going to be a 4090 competitor. A couple weeks went by, performance wasn't getting to where they thought it would, and then they started talking about a 4080 competitor. They talked about it being a 4080 competitor after they showed those misleading benchmarks, and those misleading benchmarks were shown after AMD just peacocked around talking about a 54% efficiency increase. It's clear that AMD genuinely thought they were going to hit those design goals that they were so optimistic about for a year, but then right up until the last minute, that's really when they accepted reality that at least at launch, they failed. And so I can't believe I'm saying this, but everyone I ask, whether there's someone that works at AMD or people that work with people at AMD, thinks that they can massively increase their performance with drivers over time, or I don't know if massively is the right word, but notably, that even though there's rumors out there that they launched A0 Silicon, and to be honest, from what I've heard, that might be true, that nobody believes they approved any fatal or permanent heavy flaws in RDNA 3, that whatever silicon they have launched in Navi 31 was silicon that at least at the time they felt they could fix enough in drivers to perform well enough to hit their design goals. AMD doesn't want to launch products that fall short of their design goals. So they're still trying to, and like I said in my last video, they are working over the holidays at RTG to improve the drivers. It's just not 100% if they can fix it soon. And even if they do improve the 7900 XTX by 5, 10, or even 20% eventually in the drivers, even if they manage to do that in a month, which I don't think they will, that doesn't change just how odd and rushed this launch really was, right? It really doesn't make any sense when you look at Tech PowerUp's overclocking benchmarks, which granted, it's only from Tech PowerUp pretty much right now, but it's still 3 different AIB models from a reviewer that I trust to not make things up and that he knows what he's doing. Wizard has found that you can get big clock speed increases out of the 7900 XTX, that you really can get this thing above 3 gigahertz, and if you do, it's close to a 4090. I believe that because it's not performing as well as it's supposed to, AMD knew that if they launched a 375 or 400 watt card out of the gate, they would clearly look like they've lost the efficiency war to NVIDIA. And if they weren't going to win performance, they at least had to be able to make it look like they were more efficient, even though they really aren't. And that explains this weird naming, the weird bumbled clock speeds, everything. This launch was just rushed. And that is what I believe has compounded their bad decision making. I honestly think this launch was rushed. And I actually think it was rushed for 3 reasons I'm going to get into now. Number 1, Lisa Su said that they would launch RDNA 3 this year, and from what I hear, she wants to keep up the perception with investors that AMD always launches when they say they will, unlike Intel, and that to investors, a delay looks worse than a bad launch. At least if they have a tepid launch, they can argue they're still executing on time, and that is way more important to investors. So there's that. I think they should have delayed the launch to January, to when it was really ready and they really had more time to plan everything out. But I think they just didn't want to do that because it looked bad. Number 2, I also think that AMD probably didn't want NVIDIA to have all of the holiday sales for next-gen products to themselves. For a couple of reasons. Obviously, that's just bad in and of itself. And second of all, it's because I hear that RDNA 2 stock really is drying up, that AMD actually has been successful in liquidating RDNA 2. And so if they weren't supplying a bunch of RDNA 3 cards this holiday season, they may have just ran out of stock and given the market to NVIDIA for an entire holiday season, which was unacceptable to the leadership at AMD. And finally, there's one third reason that's actually a big one. You guys might want to listen here. From what I am hearing, there really are tariffs I mean, we all know publicly they're coming, but the tariffs that are going to be reinstated on GPUs coming into the United States, it really is going to have like a semi-consistent 10 to 20% price increase across the board, it sounds like, unfortunately. Again, been saying now is the time to buy if you can get a good deal. I stand by that, doubly so with this information. I believe AMD looked around and they saw, if we don't ship as many cards as possible into the US in December as we can, a lot of these cards are going to have to cost 10 to 25% more, right? They're going to, right? And so they said, well, even if it's a bumbled launch, at least it'll be cheaper, and we have to compete with NVIDIA on price because we're Radeon. Let's rush this launch. And they just didn't think it would turn out as bad as it did. And so, yeah, that's basically my summary of what I believe went wrong. AMD had a good architecture on paper. They had an architecture that in simulations performed where they wanted it to, and they had an architecture that physically, when they tested it, always performed where it was supposed to in some games until the last minute, where the average fell way short because they just still haven't finished the drivers. They cherry-picked their results that they presented on November 3rd because they thought they would get the average up, and at least as of now, they've failed to. But they accepted this failure because they had multiple reasons to rush this launch so that it would come out at the end of this year instead of next year, and that's how we get into this situation. Now, there are two more things I want to address, though, in this video. Number one, I've seen a lot of nihilistic AMD fanboys out there that say things like, it doesn't matter. AMD would have been attacked by the press no matter what. Everyone hates AMD. And to these people, I have to say, give me a fucking break. If AMD was honest about the naming, if they called the 7900 XT the 7800 XTX, and if they priced that cut down Navi 31 card at $700 to $800, and they could have, that card does not cost as much to make as some people seem to think it does, it would have for sure gotten better reviews. I mean, this is an insane argument. If the 7900 XT was named more honestly and a bit cheaper, it would have gotten way better reviews. Of course it would have. Duh. It wouldn't have gotten these laughably bad reviews that are making the stock sit on shelves like a 4080, except now the 4080 seems to be selling out because of how much people hate the 7900 XT. To suggest that nothing AMD does will matter is ridiculous. The press wanted AMD to have a win here. Everyone did. Everyone was mad at NVIDIA for melting power connectors, for overpricing the 4080, for EVGA not making NVIDIA cards anymore. Everyone, this community, wanted AMD to win. I've never seen more people root for AMD. AMD's failures right now, the only people they have to blame are themselves, and this is not a situation where you can say, it doesn't matter what AMD does, everyone would have attacked them anyways. They wouldn't have. Stop being a nihilistic idiot. AMD fucked up. Admit it. And the second part of this conclusion, well, if they fucked up, can they fix it? Because it sounds like I'm saying they can, right? And I hate saying this because I know it sounds like a copium argument, which too many people are also making on Reddit right now, but it kind of sounds like they can. Even people at AMD that typically tell me I get too excited about their upcoming products, they seem to legitimately think they can get some more performance out of it. How much more performance? I don't know, but I would suggest that for sure some of these results are so wonky that AMD can squeeze another at least 10% out of these cards on average. And once they do that, but they have to fix the drivers first. Once they do that, they can clearly clock this thing to 3 gigahertz, and they can clearly double the Infinity cache and use faster RAM, which would add another 20% on top of it. So if they fix their drivers, which they have to do first before they bother with anything else, and then if they clock this thing 20% faster, which we know they can from Tech Power Up, and give it more Infinity cache and maybe faster RAM, yeah, I think this thing could go toe-to-toe, at least in raster, with the 4090. I stand by my early RDNA 3 performance estimates. This thing is capable of it if AMD would just get their shit together. And so, even if it's an A0 Silicon, nobody I'm talking to thinks the flaws are fatal or impossible to work around. However, one thing I will say to balance out all of this is the following. I am going to need to see it to believe it. Remember that I brought up Vega earlier? Yeah, Vega had similar rumors about some fundamental feature not being enabled in the drivers, and that never got fixed, guys. If you look at what's happened with Vega. Yeah, its performance has improved relative to Pascal over time, but only by like 10%, not 20 or 30%. Vega never became a 1080 Ti competitor. And so because of this, because of all of those rumors before, even if what I'm hearing is that this thing really can improve a lot in the future with drivers, I am going to have to see it to believe it after being burned that hard by Vega. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I really wanted to do a follow-up video on the RDNA 3 launch, and don't worry, I've got at least 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 leaks coming over the next week as we go into Christmas break. So you're going to want to make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button. If you want to support this channel besides just subscribing, liking, and sharing it, you can support our sponsors like Hero Wars, who help make these videos possible by like making the work worth it. And then also consider supporting us on Patreon. You'll get early ad-free access to tons of podcasts rolling out over the holiday season that will be ad-free. You can ask guest questions. You'll get exclusive podcasts like Die Shrink. All of that's there for you if you support us on Patreon. We can't do this without the consistent support of our patrons. But otherwise, no matter what, thank you for watching.